This episode of Yesterworld is sponsored by Surfshark. Make sure to stay to the end to learn why Surfshark is the VPN service I'm currently using, and go to surfshark.deal/yesterworld for 85% off a 2-year plan and 3 additional months for free. Of all of the episodes of Yesterworld, one of my absolute favorites was our deep dive into lost and abandoned movie props, and judging by the response, I think it was one of yours too. So I figured it was about time to explore 5 more stories of lost and abandoned movie props, the ones with happy endings, sad endings, and those that fall somewhere in between. The origins of the Loch Ness Monster, or Nessie, can be traced all the way back to the early 6th century, but the urban legend wouldn't take hold of the general public until 1930, with possibly the first published account by some fishermen of a weird lake monster in Scotland. After years of eyewitness descriptions and blurry photos, the mysterious creature became world famous with the widely circulated surgeon's photograph. Of course, this and many others would eventually be proven to be a fake, but that doesn't stop the legend from captivating both skeptics and believers ever since. So it made perfect sense to feature the urban legend as a plot device in the 1970 film, The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. For the movie, a massive and very expensive Loch Ness Monster movie prop was constructed and taken to Scotland for filming. The movie monster was so realistic that it actually caused residents and tourists to think it was the real deal. That is until they saw the film crew pulling it along the water. However, problems arose when the film's director Billy Wilder, for artistic reasons, insisted that Nessie's 2 humps be removed. Unfortunately, it soon became clear that the 2 humps were essential in keeping the movie monster afloat, as after their removal, the massive prop sunk to the bottom of the lake during a test run. So I guess you could say, 2 humps are better than none. Come on, it was funny. The Loch Ness Monster movie prop was made once again, only without the humps, but this time they were taken into account in achieving its buoyancy. They also decided to instead film the scene in a water tank within a soundstage, instead of the actual Loch Ness, just to be on the safe side.
And what, may we ask, is the purpose of that hideous gargoyle?
Merely a decoy, ma'am.
Oh!
The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes was a modest success, but the tale of the sunken movie monster was mostly lost to time. That is until April of 2016, in which a Norwegian maritime company was investigating the real Loch Ness Monster and stumbled upon something peculiar. Almost 50 years later, the giant Loch Ness Monster movie prop had somehow managed to survive almost completely intact, in the exact same location it had sunk half a century earlier. Now, as to why there hasn't been a single recovery effort to retrieve this fascinating piece of movie prop history is beyond me. But as it stands today, the movie prop still lies below the depths of the lake untouched, which adds yet another fascinating aspect to the infamous Loch Ness Monster lore. Oh, Labyrinth, the source of so many of my childhood nightmares, from an irrational fear of being kidnapped, caressed by those horrifying hands, being visited by the film's disturbing creatures, and David Bowie's package. But it turns out Labyrinth had another terrifying visual up its sleeve. It would just take a decade or so after the film's release.
Well, Hoggle is certainly the most complicated puppet creature we've ever built. It's the most technically elaborate face, because we've put about 18 motors in there to control all the different portions of the face with these 18 motors, and 4 people operating that from outside by radio control.
You see, of all of the puppets created for Labyrinth, by far the most advanced and expensive was the character of Hoggle, and it was thanks to the impressive blend of technology and the talented puppeteers that Hoggle was just as much of a star of the movie as Jennifer Connelly or David Bowie's bandmates. But the story now takes a very dark turn.
I'm not totally sure I'm believing what I'm seeing at the moment. And I think Prince Charles feels the same. To be quite serious, it is a brilliant monster.
As the story goes, once filming wrapped in September of 1985, Hoggle, along with the other puppets, were used for various photo shoots and public appearances leading up to the premiere. They were then sent with the crew back to Jim Henson's workshop in the US. However, despite being one of the most advanced and expensive puppets ever put on film, it was carried overseas in a very ordinary piece of luggage. Unfortunately, the unknown airline responsible for the safe arrival of this piece of film history quite simply lost it during transit. Now, if I were to take a stab in the dark, I'd say that the film's dismal box office performance combined with its mixed to poor reception led to a far from thorough search for the puppet and was simply written off as an insurance claim. But I could be wrong. Regardless, ultimately the puppet was left to be abandoned as just another one of the other 25 million pieces of luggage lost annually. But fast forward 11 years later to 1997, or more specifically, Alabama of all places, to a store by the name of Unclaimed Baggage.
Welcome to Side Roads, which brings us to Scottsboro, Alabama, where there are thousands of pieces of luggage that are unclaimed each and every day, and after a lengthy process, they are brought here, available for you at the Unclaimed Baggage Center.
To put it simply, this particular store has contracts with all domestic airlines to sell, as the name implies, unclaimed baggage. So one afternoon, an employee was going through just another delivery and opened a random suitcase to make a horrifying discovery. Yeah, I told you this was nightmare fuel. In what I can only imagine being played out like a CSI-like medical examination by a coroner, the grotesque remains of poor Hoggle were carefully recovered from the suitcase. Seriously, imagine the smell of latex rotting away in a hot and humid piece of luggage unopened for over 10 years. Ugh. However, it would take almost another 10 years before the owners of unclaimed baggage saved up enough cash to have poor abandoned Hoggle restored. Now, the images of this restoration process are on the same level of graphic plastic surgery, but while the results are, in my opinion, a bit iffy, the passion put into bringing Hoggle back to life is admirable. Today, Hoggle can be seen by anyone visiting Unclaimed Baggage in Scottsboro, Alabama, and is a sight you really can't unsee, just like David Bowie's baggage. In the first entry of this series, we explored the history of the original Death Star, how it was thrown away after filming, used as a garbage can at a country western show ironically called Star World, and thankfully rescued years later from the backyard of an antique shop. In this instance, the iconic space station had a happy ending, but others haven't been as lucky.
2001, A Space Odyssey reveals the strangeness, beauty, and wonder that may be waiting for us on the moon and planets in the year 2001.
When Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey was released into theaters in 1968, to some it was a brilliant masterpiece, to others, not so much. But one thing everyone could agree upon was the film's stunning ahead of their time visual effects, particularly its use of incredibly realistic models and miniatures. They were so impressive, in fact, that this is what led to the whole Stanley Kubrick directed the moon landing conspiracy. Over 5 decades later, the film is revered as a science fiction masterpiece, and thankfully many of the props did survive, and have since been featured in multiple displays and exhibits. But one of the film's most iconic movie props, Space Station 5, has yet to see the light of day, and there's a good, although tragic reason why. The year was 1974 in Hertfordshire, England, when a college student was studying graphic art at a studio near a corporate junkyard. As it turns out, this was about 20 miles south of MGM Studios' Bournemouth, or MGM British, where 2001 A Space Odyssey was filmed 6 years earlier. One afternoon, according to this college student, a truck rolled up to the junkyard and dropped off some wooden crates. The curious student made his way over to the mysterious drop-off, and to his surprise within the crates was one of the most iconic movie props in science fiction history, Space Station 5. Now, I wish this story had a happy ending like the Death Star, I really do, but unfortunately while he was able to take some pictures, due to his vehicle size and living situation, he wasn't able to take it with him. A few days later, the iconic space station was, quote, smashed up by kids and destroyed forever. But let's talk about another iconic spaceship that does have a happy ending.
Attention to the crew of the commercial vessel Nostromo. A word of warning.
While Star Wars took place in a galaxy far, far away, the 1979 science fiction horror film Alien took place in space where no one can hear you scream. Now, in case you're one of the few people on Earth who hasn't seen it, virtually the entire film takes place on the cargo starship Nostromo. The outside of the ship was captured on film by way of an incredibly detailed miniature, and thanks to the talented visual effects team, made the Nostromo appear on screen with stunning realism. So much like Star Wars, once the movie released to critical praise and box office success, it too became an iconic science fiction spaceship. Also like Star Wars, Alien was produced by 20th Century Fox, but this time, instead of throwing away props after filming like the Death Star, most were held onto by the studio. Or in the case of the original egg props, they were put on display at the Egyptian theater, only to be vandalized and destroyed.
It's movie history. These are made by artisans that are such great talents. It's as important to me as a Rembrandt painting. Some of this work, look at these guys back here. The work that's in these things are brilliant. And I can't see them just being junk somewhere, just put something. They've got to be seen. People have to know about these things. And so I feel I'm just the caretaker of this stuff. I'm the guy showing off all these brilliant people's work.
Enter movie prop collector Bob Burns, who, long story short, wound up receiving virtually every single prop and set piece from Alien on permanent loan from the studio, which included the Nostromo. But evidently, he didn't have enough storage space indoors for the massive movie prop, so the iconic ship was left outdoors on his driveway for 20 years. By the late 90s, Nostromo had seen far better days, so at Bob Burns' personal request, was taken in by special effects company KNB with the full intent of restoring the worse-for-wear ship. But while finally out of the harsh California sun, still sat in a storage locker for almost another decade. It wasn't until around 2010 when a team of passionate movie prop enthusiasts offered to restore the Nostromo to its science fiction horror film glory. The entire restoration process is incredibly fascinating, so I'll put a link to the full video in the description. But suffice it to say, the painstaking work resulted in a beautifully restored Nostromo, and at least as of 2017, remains as a glorious display at the Prop Store of London in Los Angeles. So if you were a fan of my first abandoned movie sets episode, and yes, I will do a third one, the country of Malta might ring a bell, as it's home to the abandoned movie set built from scratch but now tourist destination of Popeye's Village. But there's actually another abandoned movie set in Malta, but is technically more of a prop, the Titanic.
I'm the king of the globe!
Whoops, wrong version.
I'm the king of the world!
Now, I'm not ashamed to admit that James Cameron's Titanic is one of my favorite movies of all time, even though Jack could have totally fit on the board if they tried a little harder. But this was far from the first adaptation of the tragic sinking, and our story focuses on one that actually has ties to Star Wars. Raise the Titanic.
What a lovely thing she was. Standing as high in the water as one of your skyscrapers. And God himself, they said, couldn't sink her. Then in 2 hours she was gone, and 1,500 souls with her.
So I'll just be blunt, despite good intentions, the movie is not very good, with a premise revolving around the raising of the Titanic in order to obtain highly valuable cargo, hence the title. However, what makes this one especially unique is that prior to the James Cameron version, it had the biggest budget of any of the other retellings at $40 million, or $125 million today. And just for comparison, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, which came out the same year, cost $33 million, or just under $104 million today. So why did Raise the Titanic have such a crazy high production cost? Well, part of this was due to the cost of building a massive replica of the RMS Titanic, as the 55-foot 10-ton bigature cost a whopping $5 million, or $15 million today. The replica of the ill-fated ship was so large that it then required even more money to be spent on a massive water tank in Malta. What's truly ironic is that before his version of Titanic, James Cameron faced the very same issue for his earlier movie The Abyss, in which he simply used a freaking abandoned nuclear reactor to save costs. Now on the plus side, the sequence of raising the Titanic was actually pretty darn impressive for the time period, though a few shots do give away its true scale. But unfortunately, the high production costs ultimately doomed the film financially, as the movie as a whole was a critical and box office flop. To make matters worse, studio executives had demanded the entire sequence featuring the sinking of the Titanic, which was part of why they built the darned thing in the first place, be cut from the film before its wide release, although it was repurposed a few years later for a television show called Voyagers.
Mom, we're going under!
Or you have my favorite scene. The reception of Raise the Titanic was so bad that some believed it was truly the end of big-budget movies, which is obviously incredibly ironic given the financial predictions of James Cameron's version. So despite almost a third of the movie's entire budget going towards the Titanic prop, it was left abandoned at the Malta Film Studio. And when I say abandoned, I mean really abandoned, as 40 years later, the gigantic multi-million-dollar movie prop has been left to rot away, rust, and decay. And unlike previous stories, it said that the damage is far beyond repair, so any restorative efforts would essentially be pointless, as virtually every single piece of material would have to be replaced, so it would no longer really be the original, which you could say about many other restored movie props, but that's a whole other subject for another time. When it comes to iconic movie finales, it's hard to get much better than the original Planet of the Apes. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the 1968 film. Basically, for the whole movie, our main protagonist assumes their ship crash-landed on another planet ruled by apes. However, by the end, it's revealed that they've been on Earth the entire time, with a partially buried Statue of Liberty.
You maniacs! You blew it up!
The original film is considered a science fiction masterpiece and would spawn many sequels, remakes, and reboots, so it should be no surprise that anything from the original is highly prized among collectors. Enter movie prop enthusiast Les Hemstock, who in 2007 was featured within an article for Sci-Fi Now magazine of his many pieces of movie memorabilia from Planet of the Apes. One of his most prized possessions was the Statue of Liberty head from the breathtaking finale. By his own account, and verified by documents, he'd purchased the piece of film history from a company called Hollywood Prop Supply, who officially certified the statue as used in the 1968 film. But Lady Liberty had seen far better days, so he took it upon himself to restore the priceless piece of cinema history. And by priceless, I mean putting it up for auction in 2007 within the prestigious Profiles in History, which was used to promote the auction itself. And with a bidding estimate of $30,000 to $40,000, was nothing to sneeze at. But it failed to sell there, so it then went to the also very prestigious Heritage Auctions for a new estimated price of $15,000. But that's where the story takes a very bizarre turn.
You maniac!
Now if this whole time you've been thinking, boy that sure doesn't look like the Statue of Liberty I remember from the original Planet of the Apes, neither did others within the movie prop community. As thoroughly investigated by Jason Debord of the original prop blog, or Debord, I'm horrible at pronunciation, he noticed more than a few major differences between what was seen in the film and the piece up for auction. Even more damning was a simple examination of an on-set photo, as it seems the production only built part of the torch, the crown, the back of her head, and that's it. The wide shot is a matte painting, so very little of the statue was actually physically built.
What it entailed is building the head and the torch 1/2 full scale. I had the grips build a tower 70 feet high to get the right perspective.
Long story short, it turned out that while this was an abandoned movie prop, it wasn't from the original Planet of the Apes. It was from Steven Spielberg's 2004 dramedy, The Terminal, starring Tom Hanks. You see, this Statue of Liberty was built for an unused scene where Tom Hanks enters an I Love New York store and has an encounter with the massive display. In fact, the reason for the crown's deformity was to house a CCTV as part of an ongoing gag in the film. So once this information came to light, Heritage Auctions pulled the piece along with many others certified by Hollywood Prop Supply and actually filed a lawsuit against them. The owner of the Statue of Liberty head continued to try to sell the iconic but not really movie prop in various capacities to no avail. He even continued to take it on the road, where lucky fans could pay for a photo opportunity, but let's just hope they were actually big fans of the terminal starring Tom Hanks. But honestly, who doesn't love Tom Hanks? You'd have to be crazy. That'd be like not caring about keeping your data secure with a VPN, which is precisely where Surfshark comes in. Come on, you know you love these amazing sponsor segues. Okay, so for full transparency, in the past I have been sponsored by NordVPN, and I stand by everything I said, but when it comes to personal security, you need the option that's right for you. So when Surfshark reached out to me a few months ago to give them a try, and after using their services on my personal and work devices, I've honestly become a huge fan of what they offer, and think you will too. To put it simply, they provide an affordable, safe, fast, and very easy to use VPN service full of fantastic features. And I know, the free ones out there are tempting, but they're free for a reason and are often downright dangerous to use, so delete them ASAP. But maybe you're asking yourself, why do I need a VPN at all? Well, let's just say you don't care that they offer an app for virtually every device imaginable, and unlike other services, allow you to install them on as many devices as you want. Maybe you don't even care that when you do finally venture back into the real world and use public Wi-Fi, Surfshark keeps your data and identity safe from prying eyes. I know there's one thing you do care about: hiding your internet browsing, shopping, and financial activity from search engines, super invasive sites like Facebook, or even your internet service provider, which Surfshark does with a strict no data log policy. Plus, they have a super awesome hyperspace mode on PC. So go to surfshark.deal/yesterworld for 85% off a 2-year plan and 3 additional months for free. You can also just use code Yesterworld when checking out. Please remember to do that because every sign up supports the channel. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and do all that fun stuff, and we'll see you next time on Yesterworld.